Tire tracks led straight into the forest and stopped at nothing. In 2016, a veteran driver disappeared on a detour through Oregon backcountry. 9 years later, his sealed trailer is discovered. Cargo intact, cab empty, keys on the dash. The call to dispatch came at 6:47 a.m. on September 22, 2016. A trucker reported he was taking a detour off Highway 97 near the town of Crescent due to road construction. The alternate route was a county road that wound through national forest land before reconnecting with the highway 30 miles north. He said the pavement looked good and he wanted to avoid the 2-hour backup at the construction zone. Dispatch logged the call and told him to check in when he reached the other side. He never did. By noon, the carrier tried calling his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. They pinged his GPS unit and got no response. The device had last transmitted at 7:03 a.m., placing the truck on Forest Road 61, a narrow 2-lane route that cut through dense pine and Douglas fir. The carrier waited another hour, then contacted the county sheriff. Deputies drove the entire length of Forest Road 61 and found nothing. No truck, no skid marks, no signs of an accident. The road was empty. Search teams deployed that afternoon. They covered every turnoff and spur road branching from Forest Road 61. The terrain was rugged, with steep slopes dropping into creek beds and ravines choked with underbrush. Visibility was limited to a few dozen yards in any direction. The trees grew so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. After 3 days of searching, they called it off. The driver had vanished into 10,000 acres of wilderness without a trace. The driver had been hauling freight for 17 years. He ran regional routes mostly, staying west of the Rockies. Friends described him as competent and careful. He knew how to read a map and handle rough roads. His safety record was clean. No accidents, no violations, no complaints. Family said he called home every night when he stopped for rest breaks. The night before he disappeared, he had called from a truck stop in Klamath Falls. He sounded normal, tired but upbeat. He said he would be home in 2 days. The truck was a standard tractor-trailer rig hauling building supplies from California to Washington. The cargo manifest listed plywood, 2x4s, roofing shingles, and hardware. Nothing unusual, nothing valuable enough to explain a hijacking. The trailer was sealed with a numbered bolt at the loading dock in Sacramento. Company policy required the seal to remain intact until the truck reached the delivery point in Tacoma. Breaking the seal without authorization meant termination. Investigators checked the driver's finances. No unusual transactions, no large withdrawals, no debts. His bank account showed routine deposits and small purchases, fuel, food, tolls. He was not rich, but he was not struggling either. His home in Eugene was paid off. His truck lease was current. There was no reason to suspect he had staged his own disappearance. The county sheriff interviewed the construction crew working on Highway 97. They confirmed that a backup had formed around 6:30 a.m. on September 22nd. Several trucks had turned around or taken side roads to avoid the delay. The crew did not remember seeing the missing driver's truck specifically, but they admitted dozens of vehicles had passed through that morning. One worker said he had seen a truck matching the description turn onto Forest Road 61 around 7 a.m., but he could not be certain. The sun had been low and visibility was poor. A Forest Service ranger who patrolled the area provided additional context. Forest Road 61 was a legitimate county road, maintained and open to commercial vehicles. It was not heavily traveled, but it was not abandoned either. Logging trucks used it occasionally to reach timber sales deeper in the forest. The ranger said the road was in decent shape that September. No washouts, no major hazards. A careful driver could navigate it without trouble. But the side roads branching off Forest Road 61 were another matter. Some were gated and locked. Others were overgrown and impassable. A few led nowhere, ending abruptly at old logging sites or failed developments from decades past. The driver's cell phone records showed his last activity at 6:52 a.m. He had sent a text message to his wife saying he was taking the detour and would call her later. The message was delivered successfully. After that, nothing. His phone either lost signal or powered off. The carrier that serviced his phone confirmed there were gaps in coverage along Forest Road 61. Terrain and tree density made reliable signals impossible in many spots. The phone going silent was not unusual for that area. Cell tower records revealed something more puzzling. At 7:14 a.m., 11 minutes after the GPS went dark, the driver's phone attempted to connect to a tower near the town of Gilchrist, approximately 23 miles northeast of his last known position. The connection lasted less than 2 seconds before dropping. Cell carriers call these phantom pings. They happen when a phone powers on briefly, searches for signal, then shuts down. The ping could mean the driver had turned his phone off at 7:03 a.m. and turned it back on at 7:14 a.m. But the location made no sense. To reach Gilchrist from Forest Road 61 in 11 minutes, he would have needed to travel at over 100 miles per hour on winding forest roads. That was impossible. A telecommunications expert reviewed the data. She said phantom pings could occur when signals bounced off terrain features or atmospheric conditions caused unusual propagation. The phone might have still been on Forest Road 61 when it pinged the Gilchrist Tower, or the ping might have been an error in the tower's logging system. Without the physical phone, there was no way to verify. The driver's phone was never recovered. One puzzling detail emerged from the GPS data. The driver's last recorded position at 7:03 a.m. placed him on Forest Road 61, approximately 12 miles north of Highway 97. At that point, he should have been moving steadily toward his reconnection with the highway. But the GPS showed his speed had dropped to 8 miles per hour, then 4 miles per hour, then 0. The device transmitted one final ping at 7:03 a.m. and went dark. The location was a straight section of road with no sharp turns or obstacles. There was no reason for him to slow down or stop. Tech specialists examined the GPS unit after the truck was recovered. The device had been powered off manually, not by battery failure or system malfunction. Someone had reached up to the dashboard and pressed the power button. The driver was the only person who could have done that. Why would he disable his GPS in the middle of a detour? Company policy required drivers to keep GPS active at all times for safety and route verification. Turning it off was a terminable offense. Yet the driver, known for following rules, had deliberately shut down his tracking system minutes before he vanished. Search teams returned to that specific location. They found tire tracks in the soft shoulder, consistent with a large vehicle pulling off the road. The tracks led into the forest for about 30 feet, then disappeared into thick underbrush. Deputies followed on foot, but the terrain became impassable. Fallen logs, dense blackberry thickets, and steep drop-offs blocked their progress. They brought in a helicopter to survey the area from above. The canopy was too thick. They could not see the ground. A tracking dog was brought in and given the driver's scent from a jacket left in his personal vehicle. The dog followed the tire tracks into the forest, then circled back to the road and sat down. The handler said the dog was confused. It had picked up the scent, but could not follow it beyond the point where the tire tracks ended. Either the scent trail had been disrupted by weather, or the driver had not walked away from that spot on his own. The case went cold. Months passed with no new leads. The driver's family hired a private investigator who retraced the route and interviewed locals. No one had seen the truck. No one had heard anything unusual that morning. The investigator noted that the area was remote and sparsely populated. A truck could sit in the forest for years without being noticed. He recommended additional aerial surveys using thermal imaging, but the family could not afford the cost. In the spring of 2017, A logging crew working a timber sale off Forest Road, 61 reported finding a section of road that had not been marked on their maps. It was a narrow dirt track branching east from the main road, barely wide enough for a single vehicle. The track was overgrown but passable. Out of curiosity, the crew followed it for about a mile. The track ended at a small clearing surrounded by old-growth pines. In the center of the clearing sat a tractor-trailer rig. The crew called the county sheriff. Deputies arrived and confirmed the truck matched the description of the missing driver's rig. The trailer was still attached. The numbered seal on the trailer doors was intact, matching the paperwork from the Sacramento loading dock. The cab doors were unlocked. The keys sat on the dashboard. The interior was dusty but otherwise undisturbed. No blood, no signs of struggle, no personal items except a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. The driver was gone. The truck had been sitting in that clearing for at least 6 months, possibly longer. Moss had begun growing on the tires. The paint was faded and streaked with tree sap, but mechanically, the truck was sound. Deputies tried starting it. The battery was dead. They jumped it with a portable unit, and the engine turned over without hesitation. The fuel tank was 3/4 full. The oil level was normal. There was no apparent reason the truck had stopped running. Investigators searched the cab thoroughly. The driver's logbook was in the glove box, open to September 22, 2016. The last entry was timed at 6:45 a.m. It noted the departure from the Klamath Falls truck stop and the planned route through Forest Road 61. Below that entry, in the same handwriting, was a single additional line. It read, 7:10 a.m. Road blocked, backing up to turnaround. The time did not match the GPS records. According to the GPS, the truck had stopped moving at 7:03 a.m., 7 minutes before the logbook entry. The county sheriff examined the dirt track leading to the clearing. There were no other tire tracks, no footprints, no signs that anyone else had been in the area. The vegetation suggested the track had not been used in years, possibly decades. Yet the truck had driven down that track and parked in the clearing. The driver had written a final logbook entry. Then he had vanished. Forensic teams processed the truck. They found the driver's fingerprints on the steering wheel, the door handles, and the logbook. No unknown prints. They swabbed surfaces for DNA and found only the driver's genetic material. The cab's interior showed no signs of violence or forced entry. The windows were intact. The locks worked normally. The driver had simply left the truck, locked it, and walked away, or so the evidence suggested. The cargo in the trailer was inspected. The seal was photographed, then cut. The doors opened to reveal stacks of plywood, lumber, and roofing materials, exactly as listed on the manifest. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been added. The cargo had been sitting in the trailer for 6 months, but remained dry and undamaged. The trailer's roof had not leaked. The load had not shifted. Everything was as it had been when the truck left Sacramento. One item stood out. Tucked between 2 pallets of shingles was a small cardboard box that did not appear on the manifest. The box was sealed with packing tape and labeled with a handwritten address in Portland, Oregon. Deputies opened it carefully. Inside were 6 glass jars filled with honey. A note on top of the jars read, "For my sister, happy birthday." The handwriting matched the driver's. The sister confirmed that her brother had mentioned bringing her honey from a farm near Sacramento. She said he often picked up small personal items to deliver when his routes passed near family or friends. It was a harmless habit, one the carrier tolerated as long as it did not delay deliveries. The dirt track leading to the clearing became the focus of the investigation. Surveyors examined county records and found no official mention of the track. It did not appear on modern maps or historical plats. Forest Service rangers said it might have been a skid road used by loggers in the early 1900s, long since abandoned and forgotten. Such roads existed all over the national forest, most overgrown and invisible unless you knew where to look. A civil engineer analyzed the topography. The track led east from Forest Road 61, climbing a gradual slope before descending into the clearing. The alignment was deliberate, suggesting it had been built for a specific purpose, but no records existed to explain what that purpose was. The engineer noted that the truck would have needed to make a sharp turn off Forest Road 61 to enter the track. At highway speeds, such a turn would be impossible. The driver must have slowed down or stopped before making the turn. Historical researchers dug into county archives, looking for any mention of the clearing or the dirt track. They found a surveyor's map from 1923 that showed a small notation in that area, Camp 7. Camp 7 had been a logging camp operated by a timber company that went bankrupt during the Depression. The camp had housed about 30 workers and their families. By 1935, the site was deserted. The buildings had been dismantled or left to rot. The access road, the dirt track leading from Forest Road 61, had been built to haul logs out of the forest. Over the decades, nature reclaimed it. One detail from the historical records stood out. In 1934, a logging foreman and 2 workers had disappeared from Camp 7. The men had been cutting timber about a mile from the camp when they failed to return for the evening meal. Search parties found their equipment, but no sign of the men. One searcher's journal, preserved in the County Historical Society, described finding the clearing empty, except for a still warm cook fire, and 3 pairs of boots lined up neatly beside the fire ring. The men's boots, they had apparently removed them and walked into the forest barefoot. They were never seen again. The incident was attributed to exposure and disorientation, common hazards in dense forests. This matched the GPS data. The truck had decelerated to 0 at 7:03 a.m. The driver had then turned onto the dirt track and driven approximately 1 mile to the clearing, at an average speed of 10 miles per hour on rough terrain. That journey would have taken about 6 minutes, placing the truck in the clearing around 7:09 a.m. The logbook entry was timed at 7:10 a.m. The timeline fit, but it raised new questions. Why had the driver turned onto an unmarked track? What had he meant by road blocked? And why had he driven a mile into the forest only to park and disappear? Investigators reviewed traffic camera footage from the nearest intersection on Highway 97, about 3 miles south of where Forest Road 61 branched off. The cameras had captured the driver's truck passing southbound the previous evening, heading toward Klamath Falls, but there was no footage of him heading north the following morning. The cameras had malfunctioned between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. on September 22, precisely during the window when the driver should have passed through. The malfunction was logged as a power outage, common in rural areas, but the timing felt too convenient. A local electrician who serviced the traffic cameras said the outage had been unusual. The cameras ran on a dedicated circuit with battery backup. For all of them to fail simultaneously would require either a catastrophic power surge or someone deliberately cutting the feed. He had found no evidence of tampering when he restored service that afternoon, but he admitted the system was old and vulnerable. Someone with basic electrical knowledge could disable it without leaving obvious traces. Search teams combed the clearing and the surrounding forest. They used dogs, metal detectors, and ground-penetrating radar. The clearing was roughly circular, about 50 yards in diameter, with a fire ring at the center suggesting it had been used as a campsite at some point. The fire ring contained charred wood, but no recent ash. The wood was old and weathered, possibly years or decades old. There were no tent stakes, no trash, no evidence of recent human activity beyond the truck itself. The perimeter of the clearing was dense forest. The search teams pushed into the trees, marking their paths with fluorescent tape. They found game trails, deer scat, and old logging debris. No human footprints, no clothing, no signs that the driver had walked away from the clearing. One deputy noted that the forest was so thick in places that a person could be 10 feet away and remain invisible. If the driver had collapsed or become disoriented, his body might lie within 100 yards of the truck and never be found. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They alerted in several spots around the clearing, but each alert led to animal remains. A deer carcass, a raccoon skeleton. The decomposition of wildlife was common in forests, and the dogs could not always distinguish between human and animal scent in such environments. The handlers worked the dogs for 2 days. No human remains were located. The driver's family visited the clearing. His wife stood beside the truck and tried to understand what had happened. She said her husband was not the kind of man to abandon his rig or his responsibilities. If he had walked away, something must have compelled him. She asked investigators if they had considered the possibility that he had seen something in the forest, something that had drawn him away from the truck. The lead investigators said they had considered many possibilities, but without evidence, speculation served no purpose. One theory proposed that the driver had suffered a medical event. A stroke or heart attack could cause confusion and disorientation. He might have driven onto the dirt track by accident, parked in the clearing, and wandered into the forest in a confused state. But the logbook entry argued against this. The handwriting was steady and clear. The message was coherent. If the driver had been experiencing a medical crisis, his writing should have reflected it. A neurologist reviewed the case file at the request of the driver's family. She noted that certain types of strokes, particularly those affecting the frontal lobe, can cause behavioral changes without immediately impairing motor control. A person might appear to function normally while experiencing altered perception or decision-making. The driver could have felt compelled to turn onto the dirt track for reasons that made sense to his stroke-affected brain, but would seem irrational to an outside observer. However, the neurologist also pointed out that such strokes typically produce other symptoms: slurred speech, vision problems, or difficulty with coordination. The driver's final radio call to dispatch at 6:47 a.m. had sounded normal. His driving, based on GPS data, showed no erratic behavior. If he had suffered a stroke, it must have occurred suddenly, between 6:47 a.m. and 7:03 a.m., progressed quickly enough to alter his decision-making, yet slowly enough to allow him to drive a mile on rough terrain and write a coherent logbook entry. The window was narrow, and the scenario unlikely. A forensic psychologist offered an alternative explanation. She suggested the driver might have experienced a dissociative episode triggered by stress or fatigue. Long-haul truckers face chronic sleep deprivation and isolation. Under such conditions, the mind can detach from reality. The driver might have turned onto the dirt track believing he was following legitimate directions. He might have parked in the clearing and walked into the forest responding to hallucinated voices or visions. In dissociative states, people have been known to travel great distances, perform complex tasks, and later have no memory of their actions. The psychologist admitted this was speculative. Without interviewing the driver or reviewing his medical history for prior episodes, she could not confirm the theory. Another theory suggested suicide. The driver might have chosen the remote clearing as a place to end his life, but there was no note beyond the logbook entry, no indication of depression or despair in his recent behavior. Family and friends insisted he had been looking forward to returning home. He had plans to help his daughter move into a new apartment the following week. Suicide did not fit the profile. A third theory involved foul play. Someone might have ambushed the driver, forced him off Forest Road 61, and driven the truck to the clearing, but there was no evidence of a struggle, no signs of another person, no motive. The cargo was worthless to criminals. The truck itself was leased and traceable. And why leave the keys on the dashboard and the trailer sealed? A hijacker would have opened the trailer, taken what they wanted, and abandoned the rig on a main road where it would be found quickly. The county sheriff's final report listed the case as an unexplained disappearance. The truck had been recovered. The cargo had been returned to the carrier. The driver remained missing. The report noted that the forest was vast and unforgiving, and that people could vanish in such terrain without leaving evidence behind. The case was closed but not solved. In the years that followed, hikers and hunters occasionally reported strange occurrences near the clearing. Some said they heard the sound of a diesel engine idling deep in the forest, but when they followed the sound, they found nothing. Others claimed to see tire tracks on trails where no vehicle could possibly go, only to return later and find the tracks gone. A few reported seeing a man in a flannel shirt and work boots standing at the edge of Forest Road 61, thumb out as if hitchhiking. When drivers stopped to offer help, the man would walk toward the tree line and disappear. One hunter filed a report with the Forest Service in 2021. He said he had been tracking elk off Forest Road 61 when he came across the clearing where the truck had been found. The truck was long gone, hauled out by the carrier years earlier. But the hunter said he saw fresh tire tracks leading into the clearing. He followed them and found they circled the perimeter, then stopped abruptly in the center, near the old fire ring. The hunter took photos with his phone. The images showed clear impressions in the dirt, consistent with large truck tires. When forest rangers investigated 2 days later, the tracks were gone. Rain had erased them, or so they assumed. A logger working in the area in 2023 had a more unsettling experience. He was cutting timber about a mile from the clearing when his chainsaw quit. He checked the fuel and the chain tension. Everything was fine. He tried restarting it. The saw sputtered but would not catch. Frustrated, he walked back to his pickup to get a spare saw. On the way he passed an old skid road he had not noticed before. Out of curiosity, he followed it for a short distance. The road led to a small clearing with a fire ring in the center. The logger felt a sudden overwhelming sense of unease. He turned around and walked quickly back to his truck. The chainsaw started on the first pull. He finished his work and left the area. When he mentioned the clearing to his crew later, no one else had seen it. They checked maps and aerial photos. The clearing did not appear in any records. He filed a report with the Forest Service a week later, after the unease refused to fade. In his written statement, he described the clearing as wrong, not dangerous, not threatening, but fundamentally wrong, in a way he struggled to articulate. The trees around the perimeter were too uniform. The ground was too level. The fire ring stones were arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate, but served no practical purpose. And the silence. He kept coming back to the silence. No birds, no insects, no wind, just a void where sound should have been. He had worked in forests for 20 years and never experienced anything like it. A Forest Service botanist visited the site based on the logger's GPS coordinates. She found the clearing exactly where he had described it. Her observations were clinical and detached. The trees were Douglas fir, average age 80 to 90 years. The ground showed typical forest floor composition: decomposed needles, moss, scattered fungi. The fire ring was unremarkable, consistent with dozens of others she had documented in the national forest. She noted the lack of recent human activity and recommended the site be marked on Forest Service maps for fire prevention purposes. Her report made no mention of silence or unease. When asked directly, she said the clearing felt like every other clearing she had surveyed. Quiet, but not abnormally so. The driver's sister, the one who had been expecting the honey, became an advocate for missing truckers. She started a website documenting cases like her brother's, drivers who had vanished on remote routes, their trucks found abandoned, their fates unknown. She collected stories from families and compiled data on locations where disappearances had occurred. A pattern emerged. Many of the cases involved detours, shortcuts, or alternate routes taken to avoid delays. The drivers had left main highways and entered less traveled roads. Some were found, most were not. One post on the website caught the attention of investigators. A retired trucker said he had driven Forest Road 61 many times in the 1980s and 1990s. He remembered the dirt track leading to the clearing. He said loggers used to call it the turnaround because trucks that went down that track never came back out the same way. The road was too narrow to turn around, so drivers had to back out, which was difficult and time-consuming. Most drivers avoided it, but a few, usually rookies or out-of-towners, would miss the warning signs and end up trapped. The retired trucker said he had helped pull 2 trucks out of the turnaround over the years. Both times, the drivers had been rattled. One said he had seen someone standing in the clearing, watching him. When he called out, the figure did not respond. It just stood there until the driver looked away for a moment. When he looked back, the figure was gone. The county sheriff reviewed the retired trucker's account. No records existed of trucks being pulled from the clearing in the 1980s or 1990s. The Forest Service had no reports of assistance calls in that area. Either the incidents had gone undocumented, or the retired trucker's memory was faulty. Still, the account aligned with other anecdotal reports. The clearing seemed to draw people in, and once there, some people did not leave. In 2024, a journalist writing a feature on unsolved disappearances obtained permission to visit the clearing. She brought a photographer and a GPS unit. The clearing was not difficult to find if you knew where to look. The dirt track was overgrown, but still passable on foot. The fire ring was still there, though the stones had shifted and weeds had grown through the gaps. The journalist took notes and photos. She described the clearing as quiet, almost unnaturally so. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the branches, just silence. The photographer set up his camera to capture the clearing from multiple angles. When he reviewed the images later, he noticed something odd. In one photo, taken facing east, a shadow appeared near the tree line. It was tall and roughly human in shape, but the angle of the sunlight should have cast shadows in the opposite direction. The photographer could not explain it. He checked his camera settings and his position. Everything was correct. The shadow was there, defying the laws of physics. He did not include the photo in the published article. He said it made him uncomfortable. The journalist interviewed the driver's family one last time. His wife had remarried and moved to California. She said she had made peace with not knowing what happened. Some questions, she said, do not have answers. You accept that and move on. But she admitted she still thought about the clearing. She wondered if her husband had found something there, something he could not walk away from, or if something had found him. The driver's daughter, now an adult with children of her own, said she had driven past Forest Road 61 once. Years after her father disappeared, she had considered turning onto the road, following it to the clearing, seeing the place where her father's truck had been found. But when she reached the turnoff, she kept driving. She said it felt wrong to go there, like trespassing on a grave. She did not know why she felt that way. She just did. Forest Road 61 is still open. Logging trucks still use it occasionally. The county maintains the pavement and clears fallen trees after storms. The dirt track to the clearing is unmarked and easy to miss. Most drivers pass it without noticing, but some slow down when they reach that section of road. They scan the tree line, looking for the turnoff, wondering if the stories are true. A few have pulled over and walked into the forest, following the track to the clearing. Most come back. They report finding nothing unusual, just an empty space in the woods, quiet and still. One driver did not come back. His truck was found on the shoulder of Forest Road 61. 3 days later, keys in the ignition, doors unlocked, cab empty. The county sheriff investigated. They found no connection to the 2016 case, but the location was the same. The circumstances were eerily similar, and the clearing, when searchers finally located it, showed fresh tire tracks leading in and none leading out.